How are you seeing the trend of illicit activity on chain?
Criminal activity tends to go first to the areas of crypto that are starting to become big. DPRK is probably one of the most sophisticated criminals. We've seen them come up with exchanges as well. They noticed that it was difficult to launder funds on exchanges because of analytics. Stablecoins is an area where we're seeing more and more criminal activity flow to.
Mriganka Pattnaik is founder of Merkle Science. Merkle Science provides predictive blockchain intelligence, helping DeFi institutions and government agencies to combat financial crime.
The biggest gap right now is how do you combine the on-chain and the off-chain data. Clubbing that in with the on-chain activity becomes a very powerful resource for detecting a large amount of criminal activity.
The cross-chain bridges, how exactly are they sort of being used? Are they like the new mixers? Hi Mriganka, and welcome to Alpha and Hashed.
Hi Sri. Thanks for having me.
I understand there are sort of two sides. So there's Merkle Science, which is all around the security monitoring, predictive sort of responses, and there's the Merkle side, which is all around secure MEV protected transactions. Is that how I should understand how your company is broadly structured? And why don't you kind of dig into that a little bit right away?
I think it's fairly simple. So Merkle Science provides predictive blockchain analytics and forensics to help detect illegal activity. So essentially we help crypto exchanges, financial institutions, crypto protocols, as well as a range of government agencies across the world to detect and then trace illicit crypto activity. So this is done through various methods, right? We obviously collect addresses of criminals, darknet marketplaces, sanctions, child pornography, multiple other bad actors, and build our own custom heuristics. So essentially we have 5 addresses. How do you determine the other 500,000 addresses of that bad actor or that other 500,000 addresses of Coinbase? So that's one way we expand this data. Another way, which is the more recent way, is behavioral analytics. So you use certain aspects of AI, but essentially just look at behavioral patterns to flag addresses as behaving in a certain manner. Therefore, they're a certain category of risk. So this, for customers, it's very simple. They just get an API and an interface. They screen wallets, get a high risk or low risk rating. So this is for the private sector, so crypto exchanges and protocols. For law enforcement agencies, there's a visualization tool where they would input a wallet address, say Sri is a criminal on the dark net. How they catch you is by looking at the movement of your funds. Like when you send it to something like a Coinbase or a Tether, that's when they'd be able to catch you. So they'd use our tools to basically keep tracing your funds, seeing what centralized parties or partially centralized parties are interacting with those funds.
Okay, and what about the MEV protected transactions and private mempools? Is that another part of the company?
I would say that we do look at private mempools for certain blockchains, but this is all on the back end. So essentially, some customers want real-time analytics. They want to know data that's in the mempool. They want to know ahead of time before the transaction sort of is published. And that's why we do research on the mempool. In a lot of blockchains, it is now possible. So that's just I would say just a feature of our solutions at this point. But the company as a whole just does one thing, detecting illegal activity on blockchains.
Right. Okay. So how do you draw the line between privacy and the whole permissionless design of blockchains and the monitoring that you're enabling and providing access to law enforcement as well? Law enforcement is not necessarily always kosher. We know that. Of course, we in the broader scheme of things, there's regulation and which is important. But in the spirit of how blockchain is designed, now with the monitoring and active interventions that you have, So when you provide information to or enable all of this visibility for it could be anyone for the matter. It could be for the law enforcement, or it could be anyone who kind of subscribes to it as well. For not only going checking on Shri, the potential criminal, but Shri, the normal Shri also, who is so sort of adherent to every law, but wants his privacy, and there's a reason why he's on the blockchain as well.
Right. So I think this is the first question that's always been asked to us ever since we started the company. So I think there's like the whole scale between privacy and making sure the world is safe. For Merkle, we are just the intermediary between government agencies and the private sector. And our focus is on helping detect criminal activity or high risk activity, right? So seldom will law enforcement, especially because of all the work they have, like law enforcement or even compliance officers at crypto exchanges or protocols, they won't be interested in knowing about Shri's transactions or Shri's microtransactions. When it actually comes up for them or it becomes important for them is when it's associated with the darknet marketplace, it's associated with criminal activity. North Korea, Iran, Russia, these are severe risk categories. So, or if it's used for terrorist financing or exploitation like child pornography. In that sphere, everybody agrees crypto is decentralized, should be decentralized, and that's great. But whatever we can do to prevent criminal activity, we should do as well. I think even the crypto natives and the degens agree that that is an area they should be looking at, because they don't want the innocent to get harmed because of crypto. And that just hurts the industry as a whole, right? So unfortunately, the real world implementation of crypto is that there will be certain regulatory safeguards. So the more we have protections and criminals stay away from like cryptocurrency, the more adoption there is. In fact, exchanges are all regulated MSBs in different jurisdictions, so money services businesses, so they all have licenses. So they need to make sure criminals stay out of their system as part of legal requirements. But we've even seen non-custodial wallets like MetaMask, crypto protocols such as Sui protocol. All of them have also started taking measures to make sure criminal activity stays away from their system. And that's actually led to a stronger boost, like in terms of adoption of their protocol, adoption of their wallets, as well as more stablecoin adoption, right? So stablecoin is the new trend in crypto, and that definitely has a strong regulatory bent. So that's where I think in some ways, this just knowing this piece of information is actually helpful for even adoption for these crypto protocols. And it never really impinges on privacy for the individual, right? Generally, it only goes to the top of the stack when there is criminal activity involved. That's when everybody has to take it seriously and start looking into it.
And so having a very a deeper and a bird's eye view of illicit transactions on the net, on multiple networks rather, what's the overall trend? Is we have so much monitoring right now, there are so many tools right now to even take preemptive measures to block transactions as well. Of course, there are freeze switches now. I mean, we're always there in all stable coins, so all of that stuff is there. So in spite of all of this, how are you seeing the trend of illicit activity on chain? Is it increasing? Is it stagnant? Is it going down? I'm not. We'll come to the hacks, but leaving the hacks aside, how is it?
Yeah, so I think the answer is the same as how is the adoption of crypto doing. In fact, criminal activity tends to go first to the areas of crypto that are starting to become big. So for like a lot of analysts or traders, that's an indicator that this coin is starting to gain mainstream adoption. So in general, whenever crypto like Bitcoin prices go up, you see an increase in criminal activity, just like you see an increase in consumer activity, right? More consumers are looking at it, but that's why more criminals are looking at it. Second, I think everybody is fairly like upfront about the fact that the criminals are the ones that are the most ahead of the curve. They are the earliest adopters and the most sophisticated technology players. And even in that, there's like different segments, right? There's the tech savvy criminals and the non-tech savvy criminals. Now, as crypto is gaining mainstream adoption, that entire spectrum is coming onto cryptocurrency, and you see that in mainstream media, right? Like I think I saw a Billions episode where like there was some sort of movement of funds and they didn't want the government to detect it, and immediately like the main character just came up and said, "Oh, maybe crypto," right? So
That's
because
that's a,
of
that's because of probably all the perception around crypto. I mean, it's a different matter. Everything is visible on chain, so it's and if the two ends, the on ramps, off ramps are kind of covered, then it becomes very difficult for anyone to do much on it. But yes,
that is true, but I think the decentralized nature of crypto is what attracts consumers to it. The ease of movement across geographies, and those are the same reasons criminals are also attracted to it, because there's two things you compare it to, right? A bank transfer, and you compare it to like cash movements. So moving $5 million of cash across countries physically is going to be, it is now like that's not something people do anymore at all, right? Like with all the technology out there. So and then the decentralized nature of it, like because of all the new technology and innovation, there's always newer areas where criminals flow to that has less monitoring. So when I first started in crypto back in 2016, you could see that the centralized exchanges that had a fiat rail, they were implementing some sort of compliance, but criminals would first go there. Then they went to the crypto to crypto players, right? Like they didn't have too much compliance, so they'd flow to like back then Binance, for example, didn't have fiat rails, or there were a few other exchanges that didn't have fiat rails. But then now they're moving to like wallets, bridges, every other piece of the infrastructure that's new, gaining adoption and doesn't have monitoring. So I would say that there is an increase in like criminal activity, nonetheless, increase in just mainstream adoption, even in that space. Of course, the older world players are now safer, right? You no longer see criminals transferring too much illicit activity to like just the old school exchanges as much, only because they have more monitoring and protection in place.
okay. Yeah, I mean, they also have a pretty large regulatory light beaming on them, so it kind of makes everybody behave better. Uh, so you mentioned sort of when obviously markets are going up, when crypto activity is high, criminals become more active. Sort of, I mean, why would criminals become more active during those times if a criminal had to move capital on chain in so irrespective of the market conditions. So where does that come in?
I think it's the same reason why all of us in the crypto space would become more active, right? As there's more price movements, it is just there in media as a whole. So it attracts more people to start looking at it at that point. And the dollar value of it just becomes higher because crypto is also growing more, right? So we see the entire ecosystem sort of influenced by the price, because step one, the price goes up. Step two, there's consumer interest, and then it appears in the media more, and that's where criminals also start using some of it.
From that perspective, they're not sort of not necessarily hiding behind more on-chain transactions for that's not the reason.
Not necessarily, but yes, the more the world becomes on chain, you will see more sophisticated criminals entering the space as well.
All right. So what's the newer all the laundering that's happened earlier through multiple mechanisms, I mean, including banks and financial institutions to crypto. So laundering has been there everywhere. How what's happening in the meme world? It seems like very it kind of can be engineered for money laundering, and it seems sort of from whatever one hears, there's a lot of money being washed out there. So is there anything that you can sort of shed light on that front?
Sure. So I think in the crypto world specifically, like there's two areas where we see a lot of new like criminal activity happening.
Mm-hmm.
The meme coin space, yes, but I believe that liquidity there is a problem as well, right? Because they can't, like criminals can't control the meme coins. So fake meme coins, all of that, like that's part and parcel of it. But the two areas where we've seen a consistent increase right now is number one, like stable coins, right? The same reason stable coins are gaining so much like popularity in among consumers, like cross country transactions, ease of use, ease of flow of funds. So stable coins is an area where we're seeing more and more criminal activity flow to. In a lot of cases we do with law enforcement, US Tether on Tron is now the primary mechanism, and the price doesn't fluctuate. So I think criminals, just like users, like that as well. And second, cross chain bridging, again, mirroring, like you can see that bridging now, like the world is no longer just Bitcoin or just Ethereum. There's 10 or 20 blockchains, there's multiple tokens, multiple stable coins. So bridging between each of them becomes important. And that's how criminals make it tougher for both law enforcement agencies and also firms like us to trace their movements. So we are seeing a lot of criminal activity go there. I do think that now that there's a lot of stablecoin regulation coming about, it will be interesting to see how these players evolve. Like, of course, stablecoin issuers have a freeze function, but are they going to KYC all their users? Is something that will help a lot of the criminal activity go down, but it makes their adoption like have a layer of friction as well, right? And there's a lot of intermediaries that just aggregate different third party providers and enable stablecoin movements. They also don't do KYC. So I feel that that's where some criminal activity might start flowing into as well.
All right. So let's go a little deeper into both of these. You said USDT on Tron is one big area.
Yes.
And so the whole, the Tron chain is pretty much built on these transactions. Is that a majority of transactions out there?
That is not true. Obviously, there's like multiple reasons why a chain gets adoption, and criminal activity still is only a fraction of the reason. I do think like basically there are two big stable coins out there, Tether and USDC, right? At least earlier, right? Now there's multiple others that are starting to gain some traction. And for criminals, like no one has figured out why Tron was the preferred chain, right? But maybe there was an element, geographical element, or Justin Sun's branding that attracted a certain type of person. But I mean, among Tether and USDC, Circle had very strict compliance procedures. It was a lot more centralized, which is why I think Tether became more popular. And the same reasons like blockchains or different tokens on blockchains, like ease of movement of funds, lower fees, no fluctuation in price. So you see those similar reasons playing into why criminal activity is moving to USDT and specifically Tether on Tron.
Right. Okay. And the cross-chain bridges, how exactly are they sort of being used? Are they like the new mixers?
So on Tether, so any sort of bridge that you use, you're basically bridging between two different currencies or two different blockchains, right?
And the wallets are sort of either the same or mapped in any case. So how would it sort of facilitate, not leaving any footprints?
Yeah, so it does leave a footprint, but like it's a lot easier to trace. Like say, she conducted or bought something on the dark net or received funds from the dark net, like a payment for something. And then if you transfer it just across one blockchain, it's a lot easier to trace. But then if you start bridging it and start using less obscure, lesser known blockchains, so those tend to be gaps in that process as well, right? Like although it is all available online, forensics players like us, we have certain sets of blockchains that we cover. We don't cover the obscure blockchains. So that starts becoming a gap where that bridging movement needs a lot of manual intervention. And especially for the private sector, where we just give them an automated system where they know that, okay, this is where criminal activity has happened, this is where it's not happened. Again, bridging requires a different type of heuristic to be done, or more R&D to be done. So that's where it becomes a little more complex. It adds an additional step of complexity for us.
Okay, all right. And sort of in spite of the so many monitoring, tracking systems in place now, and on-chain live transactions becoming a part of every protocol's design as well. How is it that there are the level of hacks that have been happening, and the scale, especially by DPRK players, is just so much higher and so advanced? What is it? So one is obviously design and the attack surface vectors, all of those. The whole design and security is one part of it. The other is kind of active, the behavioral part which you spoke of. I'm sure when a DPRK hacker is planning a move, it's like a full-fledged project for them to hack hundreds of millions of dollars from somewhere. And are we not able to pick up all those behavioral aspects from a predictive analytics, on-chain analytics, and see these patterns there yet?
So the answer is yes, we are, right? So to a certain extent, we've seen. So MetaMask has a very strong compliance and security team. They actually put in processes to try and trace like North Korea based on behavioral patterns, flag out risks, or they found certain, like a specific pattern related to movement of DPRK funds. We do see that with the more sophisticated payment providers, exchanges, wallets, where they set these patterns up. I do think that there is a limitation, right? Obviously, like you learn a few patterns, like with criminals, it's always a cat and mouse game, where if you figured out a pattern that they're using, once they start getting blocked, like on the UI or wherever else, then they realize, okay, look, these guys have probably figured it out. Let's figure out a separate way of working on this. And at this point, they also have a lot of resources, right? So that's one of the reasons why they're able to keep tapping into the newer phenomenon in crypto, coming up with newer patterns. I think your second question was, despite blockchain analytics, why is there still criminal activity? I think the short answer is, like, yes, there is a certain layer of transparency on cryptocurrencies and blockchains, but at a high level, there is a lot of innovation, and whenever there is innovation, they tend to be wide spaces. Those are relatively unregulated, therefore criminals move there quickly and start exploiting it. Second, crypto and finance is just merging, right? Like payments and stablecoins in 10 years are expected to cross like payments by Visa, MasterCard, the traditional world. So then even criminals moving on chain or moving their finance to the cryptocurrency world is just inevitable. Most of the and there as well, there's a spectrum, right? DPRK is probably one of the most sophisticated criminals. We've seen them come up with exchanges as well. They noticed that it was difficult to launder funds on exchanges because of analytics. So we've seen instances where DPRK has tried to set up like small exchanges that are just going to be nested exchanges and try and like launder money in that fashion as well, right? In this case, they were caught and this was stopped, but they keep coming out with more and more sophisticated ways. There is the second like segment of criminals, just like there are new users who lose their funds on a private wallet. The second segment of criminals don't know that all of this is traceable. So therefore they come online, they just go to Coinbase and will transfer their scam money, and that gets frozen and then they get arrested, right? So you see both spectrums happening, but because crypto is just attracting all payments, all financial services, so that's why criminals are being attracted to it as well.
Yeah, no, I was asking more about the sort of the crypto hacks that have been happening, and they haven't gone down. If anything, they've of course in many cases it's projects protocols which haven't been audited robustly, but at the same time there have been multiple projects which have followed most good practices, properly audited, and are getting hacked. So in spite of having predictive analytics, these behavioral pre-attack sort of transactional behaviors should throw up enough patterns for early warning systems, pause switches, all of these to be activated autonomously. I think is that something that one can move into? Are these the works that you're doing, for example, procuring vaults, procuring protocols which are holding significant assets to kind of autonomously switch pause on if these attack vectors are kind of predicted?
So again, the sophisticated players, the bigger players are experienced in this. They would have a security team that sets these alerts up and then immediately freezes funds or cuts off like the attack vector. But where you see a lot of these hacks happening are the inexperienced players. And like essentially not having been through a hack is the inexperience, or having a weak security team is the inexperience. They could still be large projects, right? They might have done something right and are attracting a lot of consumer interest, but they chose to underinvest in security or compliance, and that's where they see these hacks and scams happening. If you, I mean, from a hack perspective, the larger exchanges now have a lot of infrastructure, so you see a lot less hacks happening on these large exchanges now, right? So they have gotten this.
Mriganka, I'm asking, like, from your work also, are you looking at any such predictive analytics that DeFi protocols could essentially subscribe to, for example, and have a monitoring system in place, which not only sort of essentially it's pretty easy to kind of have a transaction being tracked to a tainted wallet and then block that transaction or put some alert. So those things are pretty sort of par for the course nowadays, right? But I'm talking about a more advanced system where the predictive analytics comes in terms of determining whether certain patterns of transactions that are happening are actually sort of a potential hack, and it's time to almost take certain interventions at that point in time. So is there any thinking around developing such systems? Because I feel as the founder of an on-chain asset management platform, I think I'd be happy to. There seems to be a market for such systems, and I'd be happy to kind of almost put something in place.
Yes. So in fact, like a large number of wallets, like DeFi wallets, DeFi protocols are putting in place these systems, and they are predictive. They're based on, like you mentioned, looking at taint seems to be a fairly standard practice, but they go one step beyond because criminals now have become smarter. They no longer look at taint. So you'd essentially look at, like, depending on the blockchain, you look at the smart contract code, but also very simple parameters. So at this point, our behavioral analytics comprises of like very simple parameters like age of the address from which funds are coming from, amounts, transaction time, transaction frequency. Using like 4 to 10 different parameters, you can still filter out 80 to 90% of threat or attack vectors very easily, right? Just doing an analysis internally and then like working with us to set up these behavioral analytics. I think that gets rid of 90% of the crime. The 10% of the most sophisticated crime, I think the only way to do that is more like advanced combinations where there's Merkle's predictive analytics, but like you try and feed in some sort of IP address data that you get from your front end, like combine IP address, device details of the individual that's interacting, like all the UI based features. This is done in the traditional world, right? Like PayPal has the maximum number of patents on this type of technology. So combining a lot of these features with on-chain data is going to be the most comprehensive way, or the most futuristic way. That's something in the pipeline as well that we're developing for next year as well.
Okay.
So the biggest gap right now is how do you combine the on-chain and the off-chain data. Now, you shouldn't have the identity of the individual, right? Ideally, right? Obviously, exchanges have it, so they can look at that. But apart from the identity, there are other off-chain parameters that you can also look at. So clubbing that in with the on-chain activity becomes a very powerful resource for detecting a large amount of criminal activity.
Okay. But that's assuming that that's going through the UI. If it doesn't,
Yeah, so if it doesn't, then it's like far more complex, right? So at the smart contract level, like stable coins have a freeze function, but a lot of other protocols don't. So then I think the monitoring aspect and reporting aspect is what like protocols have to be focused on, right? So they can't freeze, like just by design they can't freeze it. So maybe they'll build in that functionality later, but at least monitoring and reporting is a way they can reduce crypto crime at this point.
right? And so let's talk about MEV, and there's good MEV, and then there's bad MEV, right? So there's front running transactions using MEV for that is obviously is not at all good for the ecosystem at all, in spite of however much crypto bros might push it as market dynamics. It's not market dynamics at all. So, and that's where MEV protected private mempools are going to become, I think, an increasingly important feature of chains, especially now that we're talking about sort of so many app chains being in place, and all chains which will look at more transaction efficiencies will look at having full MEF protected sort of transactions. How is your work in that space? And I understand you Merkle works with some large curators and other firms for MEF protected transactions. Can you just explain and break that down for us?
So in fact, I think we don't actually work on a lot of like the MEV aspect that you're speaking about, but at a high level, again, like I think the front running, this varies, right? So this varies based on jurisdiction and the exact activity, but the front running in some cases like can be considered illegal, and in some cases it is unethical but not illegal. So I think like based on the certain like a particular scenario, you would look at that particular case and identify whether it's like unethical or illegal. My perspective is both those things are bad and should be avoided, but one is definitely like a much stronger deterrent, right? Like so like as soon as you can say that okay, this is illegal, like front running in financial markets is illegal, right? So that means that a large number of traders will not do it because they know that it's just not worth it, right, for them, and they can get into trouble for it. The more like I do think the more awareness there is about this issue and more regulatory clarity, that could be an area that helps stop a lot of this. And if it becomes best practice that this shouldn't be done, then that's the way to stop it, especially in cases where it's unethical but not illegal, right? So I mean, that's all I have to comment here. Merkle, like there are other companies that deal with this particular aspect. We tend to deal with direct criminal activity based components rather than market manipulation based scenarios as much at this moment.
All right. Right. No, very interesting to sort of go into this. I think I've had sort of a few conversations now with founders of crypto, blockchain analytics, forensic security companies. In fact, Tom, we just spoke about what can be a good application of MEV and front run. So my ARNA protocols are our auditors fail safe. I was having a chat with the founders, and they've developed a system where there's active monitoring, and once an illegitimate or transaction is determined, they actually use front running in their system to prevent that transaction. So they actually front run that transaction. So MEV can actually be used effectively for preemptive measures as well. So the technology is really there. It's about how one uses it. Yeah, of course, if like you say, many places will be illegal, many places won't be legal, but clearly unethical. And then I think that's very much present in the space, the unethical use of MEV and front running.
I guess you're correct. That information can be used for prevention as well. So this is an area that like companies should look at more, and I think having support from protocols there would be helpful. If they make it like a common practice, then it would obviously deter a large amount of like criminals that way.
So Mriganka, so what's been your journey? I think just before this, before we got recording, we were having a chat, and we realized two things. That I'm in Singapore, Mriganka is in New York, and you were based in Singapore earlier. So, sort of, what made you move from Singapore to New York for building out Merkle? So give us the backstory. And then the other thing which we realized is that both of us are from Odisha, a small, Odisha state in eastern India, where there are two very nice cities, Cuttack and Bhubaneswar, two twin cities, and we're from there. So originally, and it's great to make that connect as well.
Yeah, so I think for Merkle's origin story, it's like I used to work at a crypto exchange called Luno. So they were one of the pioneers in emerging markets for crypto exchanges. I think Luno, in fact, had a very Coinbase heavy approach. Like the CEO was from like financial services, so they had a compliance first approach. And the CTO was from like Google, so very strong technical backgrounds and strong security focus. So they did things the right way. They were very early in the market. But despite that, despite Luno taking all the precautions and measures they could, I saw that everyday hacks and scams were a problem for them. If you work at a crypto exchange, and I'm sure anyone who works at a crypto exchange will kind of agree to this, when you first come in, you are shocked that, okay, this 60-year-old person lost $50 million in crypto to a hack. You feel sorry for them. You try and help them recover their funds. Over time, you realize that it just literally happens almost every other day, right? Like, and not because of the exchange's fault. Like, these people unknowingly are targeted by scammers, like fake websites that look exactly like Luno's website, and they give away their passwords or give away access. And now I think pig butchering, where they are fooled by an individual to transfer money to them. So I noticed hacks and scams was a rising phenomenon in crypto. It forms a very integral and important part of the infrastructure of crypto. So that's what caught my attention. And second, even whenever these hacks and scams would happen, we try and work with law enforcement agencies or refer our clients to law enforcement. And there as well, I noticed that all across the world, law enforcement had very limited resources and limited knowledge on how to tackle crypto crime. So both of these items were drivers for me to start Merkle Science. My co-founder, the CTO, had worked at PayPal as a fraud data scientist. So that's where the application of heuristics to detection of crypto crime, application of AI for predictive analytics became important. And that's why we both got together to start Merkle. We started in Singapore back in 2018. and there was the Payment Services Act that the MAS had passed. So that gave us a good boost. But over time, we realized that a lot of the innovation, and again, there are varying perspectives to this, but I think a lot of the innovation in technology tends to happen within the US. So in New York or San Francisco. So in order for Merkle to reach global dominance, become one of the leading challengers or innovators, it was critical for us to be where all the new activity is happening, all the major activity is happening. So that's why I moved to New York about 2.5 years ago. And in fact, the experience has been great because we've noticed that, of course, the private sector, crypto tends to be very inclusive, very forward thinking. So the private sector has been great in collaborating with Merkle to tackle crypto crime. I have noticed that the public sector, specifically in the US as well, is far more open, right? Crypto crime is a problem for law enforcement in the US, law enforcement in the UK, Singapore, India, anywhere in the world. But I think here, I definitely feel that the public sector tends to invest more in technology to solve that problem. And they have that strong mindset that, hey, they can't just do it by hiring more investigators. They need to have a strong collaborative approach and partner with a vendor to solve all their problems, right? So I feel that was a very good thing for us as well. And in fact, I'd say public-private collaboration tends to happen a lot more in the US, where the FBI has their own event where they call private sector to present. And they also work, Merkle now is 6 years old, but they also try and work with startups that are 6 months old, 9 months old, to see how they can also leverage newer and newer technology to tackle crypto crime. So that's something I'd recommend to agencies across the world in general, right? Even though your agency has a bureaucratic nature, if you're trying to tackle crypto crime, working with technology vendors helps you stay ahead of the curve, right? It helps you get that knowledge as well as a vendor that's experienced in this to help you solve this.
All right, cool. So enjoyed the conversation, Mriganka, really going deep into multiple aspects of crypto security and crime, and also discovering some of the common threads we have. Lovely having you on Alpha Unhashed.